Mágad Cahirley agus I welcome the opportunity.
Tá sé dírecht tíbhír dat so. Tá bhfuil faoi dheafar mars go dá. Fibre bit.
I wish to move the motion formally. I understand there's no amending motion, but that might be clarified in due course. The government is accepting the motion. I see the Minister nodding, so that's good news, so we might be able to talk about how the motion will be implemented. This motion arises from the latest report from the OECD, and it's here, and I'm sure the Minister has read it, redesigning Ireland's transport for net zero towards a system that towards systems that work for people and the planet. And so I've read that report, which is just one in a series of reports which the Minister is very well aware of, both nationally and internationally, and repeatedly from the EPA in Ireland to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They have told us that we will not meet our emissions targets with current policies. This report shines a particular spotlight on the policies, Minister, which is very important that your government are pushing. And with the existing policies, they're telling us clearly in this report that we will not meet our target of reducing emissions. They say specifically over and over that a systematic approach is needed for Ireland to meet its ambitious climate targets and improve well-being. And before going into all of that, this motion has national significance, regional significance, and also a particular focus on Galway, because it's one of the 5 cities destined to grow, and as you know, it is absolutely choked with traffic. And we've had policy after policy. I could actually place all the reports I have from 1999, standing with the Buchanan Land Use and Transportation Study, up to now, that would reach the ceiling in my office. And parallel with that, we have a crisis situation with traffic. And what is this report telling us specifically when it shines the light on the policies? It says policy rarely focuses on improving the structure of systems by redesigning or transforming them. Instead, it says most policies focus on improving specific parts of the system. So we keep tinkering with the system and changing little bits. And the example they highlight is 67% of emission reductions in Ireland are expected to come from developing better vehicles and fuels. That is, Ireland's current sub-targets assign excessive weight to vehicle and fuel replacement, expecting this to account for 67% of the transport sector emission reductions. And it says this can't happen for many, many reasons. The core message, Minister, is that transformative change is needed, but it's needed urgently. Over and over, that message is repeated throughout that report, which is 100 and something pages. Achieving Ireland's ambitious climate target of 50% reduction by 2030 relative to 2018 requires transformative change. And they go in as to what transformative change is. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, before this report, defined transformative change as a system-wide change that requires more than technological change through consideration of social and economic factors. Those social and economic factors have never been taken into account, and they were certainly never taken into account with the bypass in Galway. They're asking us to urgently review targets and redefine success, which is extremely important. They devote quite a substantial part of the report to car dependency. The report finds that Ireland has a car-dependent transport system that is unfit to help the country meet its greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. Current mobility patterns in Ireland show that 3 out of 4 citizens on average opt to travel by car on a daily basis. Now, I'm going to come back to this because this report I find comfort in that it particularly asks us to look, not to blame the motorist, not to blame those that use cars because the system has failed. I'm paraphrasing them, they don't quite say that, but the system has utterly failed motorists and people in Ireland by not giving them choices. And yet we continue with policies that focus primarily on changing the person, the motorist or the person on the ground, their behaviour, as opposed to changing the model. To meet the 2030 climate target for transport electrification is necessary but insufficient. Rapid reductions in travel demand and shifts to sustainable modes are needed. OECD report, page 100, because the car-dependent system is also at the source of many other negative impacts, refocusing efforts to shift away from car dependency is also an opportunity for Ireland to align its climate and wider well-being agendas. Over and over, a key message, refocusing efforts towards transformative change. We need to shift from the car-centric system that involves, and I find this particularly significant, breaking the link between economic growth and car usage. And if we want to look at how car-centric it is and the pressure that's on the lobby group that's there, we just look at what's paid on advertising per year to sell cars. And they highlight a figure of 50 million. I'll just get it precisely. The automobile industry spends between 400 and 600 per car sold on advertising. And with approximately 105,000 cars sold in Ireland in 2021, a rough estimate is that investment in car-centric advertising amounted to 50 million per year. By contrast, the Irish government estimates that spending on communication promoting sustainable transports, not to mention providing sustainable transports, amounts to 6 to 7 million per year. The key, of course, is to move away, as I've said, from putting the blame on the motorist or on the pedestrian or on the cyclist on the ground. Today, staff have travelled in here, lots of us have travelled in here using public transport, which is, notwithstanding the improvements made, very difficult to rely on. And it points out that the policies pursued by different governments have significantly shaped current systems and have the positive thing is, because they have shaped the bad systems, they have, if they change, potential to redesign the proper sustainable policies. Government policies, they said, have been fundamental to shaping current systems, and they will also be fundamental to moving forward. Focusing climate action on redesigning systems can provide opportunities for a just transition and for a more just end in a more just system in the end. There is enormous amount of untapped potential for systems innovation in Ireland. These opportunities will not only improve well-being, but will also result in lower energy and materials consumption and fewer emissions. I give all that by way of just policy, and that's only some of the issues identified in the report. And I relate that now to Galway City and the wider region. And when I speak about Galway City and the problems and the solutions, we cannot deal with problems and solutions without looking at the wider region, and in particular the Western Rail Corridor, which I'm sure Deputy Canny and other deputies will be talking about. I want to pay tribute to Dr. Bradley in relation to his report and the unfortunate comments that were made about that report at the time. It is an absolute necessity to have the Western Rail up and running if we're seriously interested in balanced regional development, given that the Northwest region was demoted less than a month or two ago by the European body that was relevant to that. So that's an essential. The part that's functioning has functioned extremely well, notwithstanding some teething problems and possible flooding issues. The usage of the rail from Ennis to Limerick has surprised all. And I don't hear the voices in Dublin that were condemnatory of the waste of money now coming forward and said, this is wonderful and we were wrong and we need to look at it. There's nothing like that. This report, the OECD, acknowledges that steps have been taken, Minister, by your government in relation to the Sustainable Mobility Plan. However, they highlight issues in that as well, and they want to build on that because that's still focusing on the individual as opposed to the overall policies that we need to change. And they particularly capture that on page 13 about corporate responsibility. Systems could be deliberately redesigned to promote and facilitate other choices and trigger large-scale behavioural change, which is otherwise unlikely without those fundamental changes. So if we go back to Galway in the time that I have left, I can tell you the sense of frustration that motorists and people in Galway feel with the traffic congestion. I, as an elected member since 1999, as I said, could line up the reports from the floor without exaggeration to the ceiling in relation to putting all our eggs in one basket of an outer bypass, regardless of our opinion on that, regardless that I might be in a minority. The point is we're now at the situation where Bord Pleanála, where the two local authorities and Bord Pleanála, well, let me get this specific, Bord Pleanála have agreed that the order should be quashed. We're in a limbo situation as what's going to happen next when it goes back to Bord Pleanála, or does it go back to scratch? So what do we do? What have we done since 1999? We've waited for the elusive Pimpernel of the outer bypass, changed to the N6 project that is not going to materialise. You know that, Minister, if we're seriously interested in reducing our climate action and are seriously interested about implementing the climate action plan and all of the other policies. So back to Galway City. We've had no feasibility study on light rail. I've forgotten which year 24,000 people put their name to a petition to say, at the very least, have a feasibility study on light rail. I see in one of the plans, I think it's I forget which one, considering, it's such a weak word, we need a feasibility study on light and very light rail. We need urgency in relation to the rolling out of Park and Ride. It hasn't happened, Minister. I've told you it's in the plan since 2005. I believe there is no management will to run that out. They're constantly waiting for the road before anything is done. I acknowledge some of the improvements that have been made, but unfortunately there's been no transformational change. Galway, as you know, is one of the 5 cities destined to grow and increase its population by 50%. And yet there's no overall plan for the common good in Galway. We have a city development plan, but we've no overall plan for the common good based around public transport. Arab were given the brief to look at the N6 project. They were not given a brief to look at public transport and solving our problems through a myriad of solutions other than the outer bypass. I specifically asked them that question, and they said they would have been delighted to do that had they been given that brief. And then, subsequent to their brief, added on was public transport. Rail services in Galway have never been used to their full potential. We're talking about a loop, an extra loop from Athenry to Galway to allow that to develop. This should all have been done. And now that it's not done, it should be number one on the government's agenda with a time frame for it. The response of the county and the city manager to the decision to quash the outer bypass or the N6 project is profoundly concerning to me. They said they were disappointed that it was refused on such a narrow ground. And you know the narrow ground was? They failed to consider climate change. And according to our management and our leadership, that's a narrow ground, and they're disappointed about that. Now, if that doesn't bring into acute focus the failure to appreciate what climate change obligations require us to do, I don't know what else. So in that sense, the government needs to take action. They need to designate Galway as a pilot project or any other phrase that you might like to use with a view to rolling out a comprehensive, integrated public transport system which is embedded in a Western rail corridor We need to develop a road for Connemara, and there was progress in that lately in relation to saying it could now go ahead as a standalone project in terms of a feasibility study. Up to now, completely tied to a road that was going nowhere. I would appeal to you, Minister. This is a golden opportunity. Rather than a disaster, the quashing of the N6, it is a golden opportunity to focus on what needs to be done in Galway to make it a green city, a thriving city, and to allow people to travel sustainably. Garmagat.